Hello, this is Mike, NoStressMike.com. Now, what I want to do is I want to talk about a new project I'm working on. And first I'm going to show you the project, and then I'm going to talk about it. Okay, now what it is, one of the basics in ancient combat. I'm big on ancient combat. That's the first thing I started studying when I was a little kid. I love ancient combat. And but the first, I think one of the first, was to throw a rock. Throw it. And then down the line, somebody came up with the idea of a slingshot. And this right here is about the size of a rock you would throw, or at least I would throw. And this is my slingshot. And like I say, it fits in the sling. And now you make it work. Okay. Let's see how we're going to make this. First thing, let's talk about the slingshot itself. The sling, I used a piece of leather. This is probably bigger now since I made it, and I've just barely started playing with it. And this is the type of rock it's really made for. I can do a little bit bigger and a little bit smaller, but that's what it is. But we'll talk more about that later. But this is the size of the sling. So now to make it work, well, first thing, that's the size. Arm's reach on both sides. That's the length. Okay. Now, on one side, I got a loop, and that's for the center finger. Goes like that. And now the other one will go like this. And then what happens when you swing it, and that's not the, I'm working on a lot of this. I'm trying to figure it. This sling is the first time that I've used the sling like this. So, but I say there's an overhand like that, and then there's a just shoot it underhand. And then, like I say, you goes right on like that. So this is the way it is. And then you take your rock, and then I say, you just swing it, and then bam, you let go, and then it goes. And it'll be the same thing when you're doing it overhead. It's the same thing doing it overhead. Now, but that's the way you do it. And like I say, this is still kind of new to me. But one of the first things that I discovered, I'm kind of in the city now. I'm on the outskirts of the city, and I'm not in the woods and all this type of stuff. And you know, we try to keep rocks away. What happens in the city when you find rocks like this? People will take them and throw them, and break out windows. All the businesses that I've had, I always made sure there wasn't any rocks outside. If there was little gravel. You know, the gravel you can get away with. But when you start getting big rocks like that, people are going to end up taking them and throwing them, breaking out car windows, your business windows, and this type of stuff. So after I made this and I'm ready to go practice, the first problem, I look around and I can't really practice because there's so many people everywhere. I mean, there's things, there's buildings, there's cars, there's all kinds of stuff. But besides that, I don't have endless rocks like I would if I was out in the woods. So I kind of messed up on starting this now. I should have done it when I was out in the country. So, but anyway, that's the story on the sling. You see the size. See the size of it, about like a hand. So, but that's what it is. That's the Sling. And that's probably about the, I guess you can make them bigger and smaller. And like I say, but that's what I've done so far. No practice yet, but I've got it. Okay, to give you an example of some of the rocks is, well, here's my Leatherman. So you know the sizes we're dealing with. This is the rock that I was holding in my hand. They say this is a good throwing rock. If you're going to throw rocks, this is the one. You want to get yourself a rabbit or something like that, that's about the rock that you'll be throwing. Now, this one here is kind of big. It's heavy and it's big, but it will work in my sling. And that's why I made it, is for the bigger rocks. But now as I made it and I started playing with it, that may not be a good option. I think it's going to be this and smaller. As I practice and learn more, I will know more. And I say, when you start throwing like that, see, now that might be good, I say for getting something to eat, but in combat, I think you would want a bigger rock. And especially if you're doing nighttime combat, or like I say, anytime you're going to be using this type of stuff, you want the bigger ones, I would think. For hunting, you would be using the smaller ones. But like I say, the smaller one, you can get more velocity out of it. So then now we're right back to the same thing like the 223 and the 7.62. The smaller the projectile, the faster the velocity, but the less impact you're going to have. So these are things that you're going to have to consider. You consider your target, what it is you're going to be trying to hit, and how much damage you want to get done to it. So this gives you an idea, big and small. Like I said, it's probably about the smallest you'd use for birds and rabbits, squirrels, stuff like that. But really, what I want to talk about is ancient weapons. Now, when I was a child, our house, we had a creek behind our house. And so I spent much of my time, like I say, you've got to remember, I didn't have a mom, so I didn't have any guidance. So I spent most of my time in the creek, playing around in the creek and doing the things that kids do in the creek. And at that time, so I learned early on, there's things in the wild that can hurt you. And I mean, it could be anything from a snake, even a chigger, it hurts you to a certain degree. And I say mosquitoes, critters of all types. And so from the early age, I was into ancient weapons, and it's such as a spear. I think that's probably in the way of a weapon. Probably the spear was probably my first, kind of like a staff. You needed something to keep the snakes and stuff away from you. But I say, so I had the interest and desires for different types of, ancient weapons. And the one thing that I love, the first thing, I was into martial arts basically about the same time I was doing all this stuff. So the first thing I learned is you need to be able to use your hands. Really that was one of the first things I learned, was the hands. But in the way of weapons, it was like I say, a spear or something like that. I say I'm in all kinds. I really don't care what it is. I love the simplicity of how they work and their effectiveness. About the only negative that I know, well, there's two negatives. One thing is each of them, well, everything's got their limits, but they have their limits, and a lot of times their limits are about as far as you can throw them. So that's why, well, their limits and I say their effectiveness. They're mainly for disabling, and then when you disable, then you need multiple shots, or you change the type of weapon you're using to finish off your prey. Now, but like I say, that's about the only negative there is about them. Well, in practice, I guess you have to practice with it. So you have the limitations, not only in distance, but like I say, they're not an instant lethal type of stuff, and you have to practice. But other than that, everything else about them is positive. I mean, they're simple, they're all around us, and they're effective. I say even animals, you pick up any type of an ancient weapon, the animal more than likely is going to back off from you. I don't know what it is. I guess they can see it's a weapon. I don't know how, but they'll sense it. Maybe it's because you feel strong when you have these weapons, especially once you've practiced and you know how to use them. And a lot of times when you're using ancient weapons, you will use multiple. You'll have multiple weapons. You know, like I say, you'll have your knife, you'll have your axe, you have your slingshot, or maybe a bow and arrow, staff, spear, something like that. You know, there are uses for these things, and it's really, and I'll tell you, when I work with young kids, I always start them off with ancient weapons. I always start them off with that, because that's probably about your best self-defense tool. It keeps everything out of your space. You know, I say they may not be the best in the way of combat tools. In their days, they were good. You know, they were the technology in their days, but they're still effective, even though they're not on the top of the list on technology-wise. But like I say, I always start kids with ancient weapons of some type, and because what it does is it builds up confidence, and what it is, it teaches them they can control their space, what's around them, and they realize it's something that can hurt. So they understand they have a tool that can cause pain, and they understand they have to be responsible with this tool. And it's no different than a firearm in the way you have to be responsible for that tool. So that's why I start them off with, I say, ancient weapons. And if as an adult, it's probably still a good thing, a fun thing to do. We're talking about the three-man militia. It's a good way to get your militia to go have fun and play. You know, I say all you need is one of these things, and you can take turns with it, and you know, see how people like it and stuff like that. And like I say, like a bow and arrow, you need one bow and maybe a dozen arrows, and you can just trade off with that, and until you start finding something that you all really enjoy. And even if you don't, it doesn't make any difference. All of you will be skilled in all these different types of weapons. And like I say, even now in my car, in the way of ancient weapons, in my car, I carry a machete, knives of all types, and slingshot, tomahawk, and like you would consider a club. You know, the handles for the tomahawks. I got extra handles. I've got canes, and a cane is it is an ancient weapon. I know you think it's for cripples, but it is an ancient weapon. And but those are the things I have in my car. And so, in other words, I am capable of defending my space, the space around me. I've got the tools, and I practice with these. Not slingshot. I don't really. But I got marbles, and I use marbles in it, and so I get more true flight and stuff like that. But anyway, like say the knives, machetes. I guess I do practice with just about all of them, but the tomahawk. I mean, with not the slingshot, I don't. But the rest of them, I pretty much practice with. Not each day, but they get their turn when it comes around every month. I'm practicing with some of them, and so in other words, it's good and healthy for your body too. It's a good exercise, and it really helps you out a lot. But these are things that you need to think about and know their availability and know and understand their capabilities, because there is a place for these.